If you're planning to move to S4HANA, you know the clock is ticking. The deadline keeps shifting, but there's a lot of work that should already be in motion. Your master data, your historical data, your custom code, all of it. This video isn't about the deadline. It's about a different problem that will decide whether an S4HANA program becomes a case study or it becomes a write off. Right now, a lot of SAP ECC companies, around 80%, are planning to move to S4HANA, and some of them are doing it the lift and shift way, which is basically same processes, same custom code, just on a newer platform. And in many of these programs, the team is doing that without really stopping to deal with the single most important concept in this entire migration, the clean core. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me read you something from a real US earnings call last year. I anonymized the names, but the words are exact. Our S4 HANA implementation has revealed additional complexity in our legacy data and custom code, which will require remediation. We now expect total program costs to exceed our prior guidance by approximately $20 to $25 million, and we are extending the expected timeline by 2 quarters. Now, that's not digital transformation or ERP modernization, and it's definitely nowhere close to what needs to happen with AI. That's 10 years of customizations in front of analysts who don't care how heroic your IT team has been. Now, quick test before we start. If an S4HANA program like yours went sideways tomorrow, do you know what sentence your CFO would read in the next earnings call? In this video, I'll walk you through how clean core versus customization becomes the difference between that kind of earnings call apology and a boring, on time, on budget migration that actually leaves you AI ready. So let's put the real risk on the table clearly. In 2026, the biggest risk in S4HANA migrations for US public companies is not the software, and it's not even the system integrator. Most of us will pick up a reasonable vendor, a reasonable SI and a reasonable plan. On paper, it all looks fine. The real risk is quieter. It's that we take the 15 or 20 years of customization, the technical debt, and the local exceptions, and we pour all of that into the new core, only to realize that when we're done, when the program blows out of its budget, misses its dates, and starts to create SOX issues we didn't have before. You see it in the patterns. A steering committee where everybody agrees that we'll clean this up later. A design workshop where a local variant is too political to challenge. And a risk log where technical debt is mentioned but never really quantified. And then 12 or 18 months later, you're in an audit committee meeting explaining why reconciliations are taking longer and why there are more manual workarounds and why the control environment seems more fragile after a multi-million-dollar modernization. Now, that's why Clean Core isn't an SAP marketing slogan. For a public company, a public listed company, or any private company for that matter, Clean Core is a risk posture. It's a valuation decision. It's a choice about how much of your future earnings you're willing to bet on code that nobody fully understands anymore. Sitting in the very system that drives your revenue, your inventory, and your financial statements. If you strip away the vendor slides, that's the real question. Are we using S4HANA to reduce the complexity in the core? Or are we about to freeze our current complexity in the new platform and carry the risk and the cost for another decade? Let's break this down in plain English. Clean core means the heart of your S4HANA system runs on standard processes with minimal custom code and a configuration that SAP can actually support and upgrade without a war room every time there's a new release. So, a quick thought experiment. If I froze your system today and asked, John, show me the list of things in your core that only one or two people in the company would really understand, how long would that list be? So, Clean Core is about making that list as short as possible. It means we stop treating ERP like a custom development playground and start treating it like critical infrastructure that underpins your financial statements, your controls, and eventually your AI. So here's your challenge. If your steering committee still talks about meeting local needs before they talk about protecting the core, you don't have a clean core strategy. You have a customization strategy with a clean core label on the slide. So, clean core in a public company context has three very boring, very powerful tests. So, number one is most of your core processes look recognizable like an SAP standard. Any custom object in the code has a clear owner, clear business case, and a clear exit plan. Number three is you can take SAP's quarterly updates without a full time army, doing the emergency regression testing. If a board member asked you, can you explain your clean core policy in 2 sentences? Do you have that answer today? Or would you have to, turn into a 20-minute detour about history, exceptions, and then we're working on it? Because if we get this wrong, every AI slide in the strategy deck is built on sand. Your Joel demos, your co-pilots, your AI-enabled close, all of it will spend its first 12 months tripping over bad data, inconsistent processes, and invisible customization. If we get it right, S4HANA becomes the stable, the boring, defendable platform everybody else can build on. Your AI use cases, your analytics, and your automation. Without you having to bet on the next earnings call on custom code nobody wants to touch. In the next section, I want to draw a very simple line. What truly belongs in the core and what has to be pushed to the edge if you want to call it clean core with a straight face. So, this is where the pushback starts. So, somebody will say, fine, we were over customized in ECC, but we do need some customizations. We're not a vanilla business. And that's fair. You do need some. The question is where. If I asked your program lead today, show me the map of what's allowed in the core versus what should sit at the edge, would they be able to pull out a single slide or would they have three different documents that don't quite match? So clean code doesn't mean no customization. It means something more sharper. No business logic that affects, finance, order flows or controls lives inside S4. Inside S4, the core stays boring on purpose. How revenue is posted, how inventory moves, how approvals and controls are enforced, that stays standard. No clever code. No just this one little enhancement that changes how the ledger behaves. No local variant that quietly bypasses a control because the plant needs it in that way. So, a challenge for your steering committee. If a proposed change can impact your P&L, your balance sheet, or your control environment, why is it being solved with custom code in the core instead of a configuration or an edge solution? If there isn't a good answer, it does not belong in S4. So, pricing experiments, customer experience tweaks, industry specific workflows that genuinely make you different, that belongs at the edge on BTP or in side by side extensions, in microservices or other platforms where you can change them without breaking your books or rerunning half of your regression suite. Imagine your next major product launch. Do you want to be arguing with auditors about a custom revenue recognition enhancement in S4 or iterating prices and customer workflows safely at the edge while the core posts the accounting the same way it always has? That's the line in the sand for clean core. Core for stability and trust, and edge for speed and differentiation. So, next, I'll show you what happens when companies ignore that line and what it looks like when one company actually enforces it. So, let's look at the first example, a US listed manufacturer, about $2 billion dollars in revenue. They've been on ECC for around 20 years. Every time the business wanted something, the answer was, let's customize it. By the time they started planning S4, they had thousands of Z transactions and custom tables, and no one had a complete picture. So the board approved S4 on a very simple promise: same processes, modern platform, lower run costs, and ready for AI. What actually happened? The business argued that every legacy exception was critical. So the integrator rebuilt huge chunks of that custom logic inside S4. Now the core was no longer standard, it was just ECC expensively, re-implemented. So the costs blew past the original business case. The go live date slipped. And because of all that custom logic around the revenues and the rebates, they had to stand up layers of manual controls just to keep the auditors comfortable. On paper, they live in S4, right? No doubt about it. But in reality, they re-platformed their entire technical debt and added more. Let's look at the second example. A multi-country retailer with, big growth ambitions. They wanted unified processes, real-time inventory, and better visibility for the street. Now, their problem wasn't, only custom code, it was data and process chaos. Every country had its own way of doing returns and discounts and promotions. None of that really was harmonized before the S4 design workshops. So, what did the project team do? They took inconsistent processes and dirty data and they tried to make it work with configuration tricks and enhancements inside the core. At Go Live, the ledgers technically balanced, but the reconciliation took weeks and not days. Unexplained inventory movements, and audit started asking hard questions on whether these controls were operating the way the design documents claimed. Of course, there was no fraud claim, but there was no restatement. But suddenly, S4 appeared in the 10K risk section, and they had to disclose control weaknesses and put temporary manual workarounds in place. That's the quiet version of a train wreck. You don't make the headlines, you just bleed time, trust, and margin. Now let's look at the third example. A healthcare group that chose a different path. Same pressures, aging ECC, rising support costs, regulators asking tougher questions, a board asking about AI. From the start, the CIO and the CFO agreed on one simple principle. If a change can impact cash, revenue, inventory, and control evidence, it does not get coded into the S4 core. They classified every requirement into two buckets: core, where they would accept the SAP standard even if it meant changing the way they worked, and edge, where they would build on BTP or any other platform explicitly decoupled from the core. Now, it wasn't painless. Some business units had to give up, local variations that they had defended for years. But the results look so very different because the S4 core stayed upgradable. Reconciliations after go live were measured in days, not months. And audit supported the design because the financial logic was transparent. And, mostly it was standard. And when they started piloting AI use cases, they weren't spending the first year cleaning up the mess. They could actually build on top of a stable platform. So here's the rule I would suggest for CIOs and CFOs in the US public companies. Inside the SAP S4 core, standard processes only. No custom business logic that changes postings, approvals, and controls. Zero tolerance for, just this one enhancement that affects the ledger. At the edge, customer experience, analytics, AI, industry specific variations that don't touch the accounting. If a change can create a SOX issue or a reconciliation nightmare, it has no business being coded into the S4 core. If it's about how you compete in the market, it belongs at the edge. And here's the challenge for your next steering committee. Can you articulate this rule in one sentence that a non technical board member would understand? Because if you can't explain your clean core policy to your audit committee, you don't have a clean core policy. You have a collection of local decisions masquerading as a strategy. The enforcement mechanism is simple. Every proposed core modification gets the SOX test. Will this affect financial reporting? If yes, it dies, unless there's a business case so compelling that it overrides the audit risk. Will this impact controls? If yes, it goes to the edge, period. So if your program is 18 months in and you still can't draw a clear line between the core and the edge, you're not managing risk, you're managing exceptions. And exceptions are how customizations creeps back into the places where your financial statements live. So the board doesn't need to understand SAP. They need to understand that the clean core, that is your core policy, isn't negotiable. It's the difference between, modifying your ERP and then modernizing your technical debt. In my view, it's worth sanity checking three things. Number one, can you explain your current level of ERP technical debt to your audit committee in one slide? The second is your S4HANA business case explicitly tied to reducing that debt and protecting your control environment? Or is it mainly framed as modernization and innovation? And the third one is, on your program today, who plays that guardian of the standard? Who has the authority to say no when the business asks to rebuild ECC style code logic inside the S4? If those answers are vague, the risk isn't about a budget overrun. The risk is seeing your S4 HANA program show up as a huge problem for you. So, clean core is about being honest about risk. Your S4 core can go in one of two ways. It either stays boring and standard and easy to upgrade, or it slowly turns into the most expensive bit of technical debt on your balance sheet. Now, there isn't anything much in between. But if you want a one liner you can use with your board, it's this: in the core, boring is good. At the edge, you earn the right to be clever. So if your ledger, your controls, and your order flow depends on custom code, you don't have a clean code. You've just built another bespoke system and stuck an SAP logo on the login screen. And that's why upgrades hurt and your audits drag on and simple changes turn into many projects. So, one last thing, be honest with yourself for a moment. Are you about to sign or have you already signed a fixed price S4HANA project that basically lifts and shifts all current processes into the new system? Because that's how you end up with a new S4 environment and all the old problems just more expensive and harder to unwind. If that sounds familiar, the next video you should watch is this one. In this video, I break down why fixed price ERP deals so often blow up and how they lock in bad scope and how the same assumptions that wreck your budget also wreck your clean core. So if you're a CIO or a CFO or a sponsor anywhere near a contract signature, watch that before you sign anything and share this video with your steering committee and click the next video on the screen and I'll see you there.